Alright, in this video we're actually going to solve a system using matrices. And so I've got my system here, my system of 3 variables, 3 equations, and I'm going to first write it in what's called the augmented matrix. And so that just amounts to taking the coefficients of your x, y's, and z's and then adding on that column that involves your answers. So that would look like this. So there it is. There's my augmented matrix. And let's just note that we've got a row 1, so that when I do the row operations, you know what I'm referring to. That's row 2, and that's row 3. So what's our goal? What is our goal in this problem? I'm going to write our goal up here. Our goal is to get our matrix in this form. In other words, I want to use row operations until my matrix looks like this. And why do I want it to look like this? And by the way, these are just number symbols. These are all just number symbols. Why do I want it to look like this? Because this means that x plus 0y plus 0z equals the first answer. 0 plus 1y plus 0z equals the second answer. 0x plus 0y plus z equals the third answer. In other words, this is like encoded in this is my answer for x, that's row 1, my answer for y, and my answer for z. Alright, so that is my goal. And the method I use to do that, the method I'm going to be using to do all this, involves trying to get a 1 first, in the upper left hand corner, and then turning all these to zeros. So I start by working at the upper left, the row 1, column 1, getting a 1 there, and then turning everything else to zeros. After that, I move to the next column, I get a 1 here, and I try to turn those guys into zeros. And then finally, I get a 1 here and turn everything above into zeros, and then get my answers here. The reason you need to have that strategy is because you don't want to sort of make yourself go in circles as you're doing all these row operations. Alright, so let's start. One thing you should notice is our first goal has sort of already been met, right? I've got a 1 in the upper left, so that's good because I'm kind of well on my way to what I want. So what's the second goal? I want to turn everything in column 1 below the 1 into 0. So I want to get all these zeros here. And so how do I do that? Well, let's first knock out this 2 here in row 3. So I can do that by multiplying row 1 by a -2. So if I do row 1 by -2, and then add that to row 3. And so when I do that, that results in this new matrix. So row 2 didn't change, so I'm going to just copy that down. And I'm going to leave row 1 as it is because I like that 1 in the upper left-hand corner. And so by doing -2 times row 1, that turns this into this 1 into a -2, turns that into a -2, and then it turns the -2 here into a 4, turns this 1 into a -2, and it turns the 7 into a -14. Okay, so now I'm going to add that to row 3. That's going to kill that 2. I got a 4 plus a -2 is a 2. I got a -2 plus a -1, which is a -3. And a -14 plus a 3 gives me a -11. And so I've gotten 1 0 in the first column. Now I got to get that middle, I got to turn this here into a 0. So how do I do that? Well, I can multiply row 1 by a -3 and then add that to row 2. So if I multiply it by a -3, then I get, I'm going to rewrite row 1 times -3 above. I get a -3 here, I get a 6, I get a -3 here, and I get a -21. And so now I add them. So my row 3 is not involved in this change, so I'm going to copy that here. -3 plus a 3 gives me a 0. 6 and a -5 is a 1. -3 and a 1 is a -2. And a -21 and a 14 is a -7. And I leave row 1 as it is. Awesome. And so we're kind of on our way. We've actually done one whole column, right? Take a look at our first column. It's exactly what we want it to look like. So now I focus on column 2. I want a 1 there, and what do you know? It's already a 1, so I don't have to worry about it. And now what I want to do is I want to turn everything else in column 1 into zeros. Well, that guy's done, so that's already a 0. So now I focus on this guy here, turning that 2 into a 0. So how do I do that? Well, let's multiply row 2, my new row 2, by -2, so -2 row 2, and then add it to row 3. And so when I do that, I get, so if I multiply -2 times my row 2, I'm going to write it below, I get 0, -2, +4, and a +14. My row 1, by the way, is not involved, so I'm going to copy that as it is. 1, 0, -3, -7. And then my row 3 becomes, let's see, 0 plus 0 is 0, of course. -2 plus a 2 makes that a 0. And a 4 and a -3 gives me a 1. And a 14 minus 11 gives me a 3. Alright, and what do you know? I'm done. I'm already done now with row 2. Column 2. I'm sorry, column 2. I'm done with column 2. So like these columns now look exactly what I want, like I want them to look. Now I got to turn column 3 into having a 1 down here and then zeros above. And so let's kill off this -2 first. So I'm going to multiply my row 3 by a +2, and I'm going to add it to row 2 to kill that -2. So this becomes, I'm going to multiply row 3 by 2. That's a 0, that's a 0, that's a 2, and that's a 6. And now when we add them, so row 3 I'm going to leave as is. I'm just going to change row 2 to kill that -2. So it becomes a 0, 0 plus 0, 0 plus 1 is a 1, of course. 2 plus a -2 makes that a 0. And a 6 and a -7 makes this a -1. And then row 1 didn't change. And then our last line of business now is to kill this -3 here. So I'm going to do that by multiplying 3 row 3, and then adding it to row 1. So 3 row 3 now looks like this, 0, 0, 3, 9. And when you add it, so row 3 is going to stay the same. And then 0 plus 1 is 1, 0 plus 0 is a 0, 3 plus a negative 3 is a 0, and 9 plus a negative 7 is a 2. And we are now exactly where we want to be 10 minutes later, because this now is has my answer coded. I'm going to shrink this all up. I actually now know my answers. Remember, this is the X column, that's the Y column, and that's the Z column, and these are my answers. So this means that X equals 2, Y equals negative 1, and Z equals 3. So all those row operations and turning it into this form allows me to sort of just read off the system. Now, of course, there are easier ways to do this, and those easier ways involve calculators, which I'll show you in the next video. But you want to understand that this was problems like this would often take, without matrices, could take like front and back of 2 pieces of paper before the applications of matrices got involved in this process. So this really is an improvement from our way of doing it a couple of videos ago, whether you appreciate that or not. But these row operations really help us, and so again, you really want to get comfortable sort of manipulating them and remembering where, to focus on column 1, then move to column 2, then column 3, and you do that, and by the time you're done, you'll have your answers literally staring you in the face.